The Spanish flu of 1918 to 1919 swept through Europe like wildfire, killing millions and reshaping societies overnight. But hidden beneath the statistics was a darker reality, a world where desperation, secrecy, and lust collided in shocking ways. When people faced death each day, rules of morality twisted and forbidden desires exploded into the open. Strangers in quarantine wards touched in the shadows, widows found solace in fleeting ecstasy, and priests whispered promises of healing that became traps of power and pleasure. If you think today's scandals, like Jeffrey Epstein's web of abuse, shocked the modern world, imagine a pandemic that stripped away shame as quickly as it stole lives. The Spanish flu carried more than disease. It unleashed hidden, filthy stories. The Jeffrey Epstein scandal exposed how hidden power and secret desires can flourish during chaos. But history holds even darker parallels. In 1918, as Europe battled the Spanish flu, secrecy, lust, and exploitation brewed in quarantine wards. Behind masks and fevers, passion mixed with fear, birthing scandals no one dared confess. In Europe, quarantine wards were prisons of silence. Men and women confined together by disease discovered new forms of intimacy born from despair. Nurses whispered confessions to dying soldiers, their gloved hands brushing against trembling flesh. Doctors, cloaked in authority, often blurred the line between medical care and temptation. Letters recovered from Italian hospitals describe women confessing that touch and closeness mattered more than healing. Historians uncovered diaries of Spanish nurses who admitted to nighttime meetings in storerooms, their bodies trembling with forbidden energy, knowing infection might follow. Like Epstein's private island, these wards created closed worlds where the vulnerable became easy prey. Power dictated consent. Patients surrendered not because they desired, but because survival depended on the one holding the mask, the medicine, the authority. Infected lungs wheezed, yet passion burned stronger. Fear of death intensified every encounter, making every kiss feel stolen from the grave. Desire mixed with coughing fits, lust echoing alongside dying breaths. These stories, long buried under shame, remind us how fragility turns bodies into bargaining chips and power into a weapon of seduction. Comment if this shocked you. The Spanish flu spread rapidly in military barracks where soldiers confronted death daily. In France, accounts describe secret encounters between officers and young recruits, moments hidden beneath the haze of fever and fear. The authority of rank turned into a weapon of seduction. Recruits, barely men, were coerced by promises of safety, rest, or even medicine. War diaries reveal confessions of officers boasting about their flu lovers as if illness excused exploitation. The disease created urgency. Life was short, bodies craved warmth. Yet these connections carried shame, especially when exposed. Historians draw parallels to modern scandals like Epstein's exploitation, where isolation and secrecy shielded abusers. Military hospitals became dens of passion and manipulation. Women volunteers serving in canteens often found themselves pressured by commanders who dangled rations and shelter as bargaining tools. For many, lust was not chosen, but endured. Fever sweat and trembling hands mixed with uniforms and whispered orders. Imagine lying in a cold barrack, your body shivering from sickness, when a figure of authority leans close and demands surrender. Could you resist, knowing tomorrow you may not live? Does history feel darker than today? Churches across Europe turned into makeshift hospitals during the pandemic. Priests prayed over the dying, but temptation followed where faith mixed with flesh. Records in Spain reveal confessions of priests exploiting women during last rites, offering salvation for submission. The cloak of religion concealed acts too unspeakable for public memory. One diary, hidden for decades, recounted how nuns, overwhelmed by despair, gave in to secret unions with priests, both fearing death and craving closeness. The church's power made refusal nearly impossible. What Epstein achieved with wealth and influence, the clergy wielded with divine authority. Some women wrote in private letters that confessionals became chambers of seduction, where whispered sins turned into invitations. Fear of damnation mixed with the dread of influenza. Believers clung to priests for spiritual strength, but found themselves pulled into webs of guilt, desire, and humiliation. Religion was supposed to save, but in the feverish nights of 1919, it became a mask for exploitation. Could you imagine trusting a priest to heal your soul only to find your body enslaved? Comment if faith betrayed you feels more dangerous than war itself. Not all stories were about exploitation. Some women used the Spanish flu's chaos to claim agency in ways society forbade. In Paris, widows of soldiers, free from traditional constraints, sought secret lovers among doctors and nurses. Letters revealed their words, "In fever, I found freedom." The illness blurred morality. Women stepped into passion openly, using disease as cover for rebellion. Some even traded intimacy for medicine, not as victims, but as negotiators of survival. One widow recounted how she seduced a doctor for quinine, describing the encounter as victory, not shame. The pandemic, like Epstein's scandal, showed how crisis magnifies power dynamics. But here, women sometimes flipped the script. They became agents of their own desire, risking infection for pleasure or control. Yet history labeled them filthy, sinful, unworthy of remembrance. These stories, unearthed in letters and diaries, expose the double-edged sword of scandal, victimhood and agency intertwined. What would you have done in their place? Would you surrender for survival or wield seduction as your own power? In the heat of fever, survival and lust collided until both burned into history's silence. The Spanish flu revealed how crisis magnifies human desire, turning wards, barracks, and churches into hidden stages of lust and power. But one story burned brighter than all. An affair whispered across Paris streets where seduction turned deadly. Next, discover how Weinstein's scandal mirrors this forbidden tale of coercion and survival. Harvey Weinstein's scandal exposed how power and desire twisted Hollywood's golden halls into hunting grounds. But the stage was set long before. During the Spanish flu in Europe, whispers of leaders, priests, and medics taking advantage of the vulnerable created stories as shocking, filthy, and unforgettable as any modern scandal. As the Spanish flu spread across Europe, hospitals became more than sites of healing. They turned into hidden theaters of human weakness. Isolated wards created opportunities where authority ruled, unchecked. Nurses reported patients who, weakened and desperate, were subjected to whispered promises of care in exchange for secret encounters. Doctors, often hailed as saints for their work, sometimes abused their unchecked position. A diary from a nurse in Madrid described how one physician demanded compliance from women patients, claiming it would ease their suffering. These abuses were whispered about, but never openly challenged. Fear of exposure and the stigma of illness kept victims silent. The connection to Weinstein's story is uncanny. He too used closed doors, private meetings, and the vulnerability of women seeking help to exploit them. Just like those silent wards, Weinstein thrived in silence, his victims too often dismissed. Both eras revealed the same sickness: unchecked power wrapped in respectability. Could you imagine lying in a hospital bed, fevered, fighting for breath, and realizing that even in illness, your body was a currency demanded by the powerful? Religious figures were not immune to the temptation of control. With Europe drowning in death, many turned to priests for confession, desperate to cleanse sins before possibly meeting their end. But in some cases, these holy men blurred sacred duty with personal lust. Records from Italian village archives mention women confessing that priests had demanded secret meetings at night under the pretext of absolution. The setting was perfect for exploitation: dark chapels, whispered words, and souls desperate for hope. Instead of offering salvation, some priests manipulated spiritual authority, exchanging forgiveness for flesh. One anonymous letter from a Spanish woman accused her priest of coercion, stating, "My sins were washed away only if I opened myself to him." The Weinstein scandal mirrors this abuse of trust. Just as actresses went to him seeking roles or protection, only to be cornered, these women sought faith and redemption, but were met with exploitation. In both cases, power is masked as opportunity. In both cases, silence protected predators. Ask yourself, how do the lines between faith and desire blur so easily when fear rules? While the masses coughed and died in crowded wards, Europe's nobility often quarantined in estates. Behind locked gates, where servants and housemaids had no escape, stories spread of strange rituals masked as protection. Accounts in French memoirs describe nobles demanding that young female servants share beds to ward off fever with warmth. Some insisted on bizarre acts during masked gatherings, claiming masks symbolized purity and shielded disease. This strange theater of masked passion feels almost like a perverse carnival where rules broke down under the shadow of death. A maid in one French household later confessed in court records that her employer touched under the mask and declared it holy against infection. Weinstein's Hollywood mirrored this masquerade. Exclusive hotel suites, private casting sessions, and the illusion of opportunity created the same dynamic: power disguised as legitimacy, exploitation parading as ritual. The Nobleman's Mask and Weinstein's movie set carried the same sinister script: dominance written in silence. Could you survive in such a locked house where escape was impossible and your survival hung on obeying the master's whispered rules? What made these filthy stories endure was not just the acts themselves, but the silence that followed. Women who endured abuse during the pandemic rarely spoke out. The stigma of sexuality, illness, and dishonor weighed heavier than justice. A Spanish widow's letter to her sister, uncovered decades later, admitted she had been forced by her doctor, but confessed she never revealed it for fear that my children would be shamed. This mirrors Weinstein's survivors, silenced for decades by fear of losing careers or facing ridicule. In both worlds, shame was a weapon more powerful than fists. The predator's true power was not only in coercion, but in ensuring the victim believed silence was the only option. The Spanish flu stripped Europe bare, showing how desperation, power, and lust collide in ways society rarely admits. These stories prove that pandemics reveal more than disease. They reveal humanity's dirtiest hunger. Would you have spoken, knowing the cost of truth could destroy your life? The Spanish flu carved hidden wounds, stories buried under coughs and coffins. From sick wards to noble houses, desire thrived in silence. But as scandal spread, whispers grew bolder. The next chapter takes us into darker alleys of survival, where pleasure and power met in grotesque bargains of flesh. The Clinton-Lewinsky affair reminded the world how passion hidden in whispered notes could topple the powerful. But centuries before, in the midst of the Spanish flu, men and women trapped in quarantined cities wrote forbidden letters of lust. Their secrets turned political halls into dens of betrayal and shame. In 1918, when the Spanish flu swept through Europe, governments closed theaters, schools, and even parliaments. Yet behind the closed doors of grand estates, leaders and their companions found new ways to indulge. Diaries from Paris and Madrid reveal letters, steamy, coded, and dangerous, passing between high-ranking officials and their lovers. These weren't simple declarations of affection. They carried scandalous descriptions of encounters that could destroy reputations if revealed. One French minister wrote to a nurse, describing how the illness outside only feeds the fire inside me. She replied that his position gave her power she never imagined, power over his name, his honor, his weakness. Such letters were locked away, yet some survived in archives, haunting proof of lust disguised as love. Like the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal, where one intern's letter and a stained dress became evidence that shook an entire presidency, these letters revealed the vulnerability of men who pretended strength in public but surrendered to desire in private. Every word, every line was a ticking bomb. If read aloud in Parliament, they could ruin careers overnight. These weren't just affairs of passion, they were battles of dominance, where women held the pen and men risked everything to answer. Hospitals during the pandemic were supposed to be sanctuaries of healing, yet they often became secret chambers of lust. Nurses, forced into close contact with patients, became objects of both affection and exploitation. In Barcelona, rumors spread of a hospital ward where a doctor locked himself away with 2 nurses for days. His excuse? Preventing the flu from spreading outside. The truth, as uncovered in testimonies, was far darker. Inside that chamber, patients were neglected while private desires consumed the staff. A scandal erupted when a janitor discovered discarded garments and intimate notes hidden under mattresses. The city council silenced the affair, fearing public outrage. But whispers spread through the city like infection. Everyone knew something shameful had happened. The Clinton-Lewinsky scandal showed how power could trap the young and vulnerable. Lewinsky herself admitted feeling manipulated by authority, by the imbalance in the relationship. Similarly, in 1918, nurses often held no voice against doctors. They were young, ambitious, and desperate for work. To resist could mean dismissal. To comply meant surrender. The pandemic gave men excuses to isolate, to dominate, and to indulge. For women, silence was survival. For history, these hidden stories reveal how pandemics do not just expose disease, they expose the darkest truths of human desire. Theaters were closed, yet the wealthy found ways to keep entertainment alive. In Milan, secret salons became the stage for forbidden performances. Dancers, actresses, and singers, suddenly out of work due to the flu, were hired by aristocrats to perform in private halls. But these weren't ordinary performances. Guests demanded more: intimate gestures, suggestive dances, private companionship. One surviving diary from Countess Emilia G. describes a shocking evening. Women draped in masks and veils, performing scenes of seduction, while noblemen cheered. Afterward, the audience was invited to choose a partner and retreat to candlelit chambers upstairs. Masks, meant to prevent disease, became props of erotic mystery. When news of these gatherings reached church officials, it sparked outrage. Yet money silenced protests, and the salons continued. It was a world of hidden indulgence during mass death, echoing the hypocrisy later seen when Clinton stood before the world, denying what had already been exposed. Desire, when mixed with power, always finds its stage. Just as modern scandals are replayed in courtrooms and press conferences, these Renaissance-style salons of 1918 showed how the rich could indulge even as common citizens buried their dead. Disease was invisible in those chambers, but shame clung to every wall. Perhaps the most haunting scandal came from London. A military officer, quarantined during the flu, wrote dozens of letters to his wife swearing loyalty. Yet at the same time, he exchanged love notes with a young woman working in the same barracks. When his wife eventually opened the sealed letters after his death, she discovered not only his lies, but also detailed confessions of nights spent in her absence. The letters were read aloud in private court proceedings, shocking even hardened officials. One line read, "I promised her the world, though I already belonged to another." That confession destroyed the widow's inheritance, as the officer's estate was redirected due to charges of dishonor. The Clinton-Lewinsky scandal reminded us how love letters, whether typed on White House stationery or whispered into hidden tapes, can wreck marriages and legacies. In 1918, just like in 1998, the same truth remained. Intimacy can be weaponized, betrayal leaves scars deeper than disease, and desire refuses to stay hidden. Every scandal has a victim. For Lewinsky, it was her reputation. For the officer's wife, it was her shattered life. For us, these stories are mirrors, reminding us that when power and lust meet, loyalty is the first casualty. Letters, chambers, salons, and betrayals each revealed how the Spanish flu turned Europe into a hidden theater of lust. But scandals never sleep. If these affairs shocked you, the next tale will burn deeper. Because what unfolded in the hands of kings and queens left scars on nations themselves. When Tiger Woods fell from grace, the world saw how a man built on discipline could crumble to temptation. The Spanish flu revealed similar cracks. In Europe, the most disciplined men, priests, generals, doctors, those expected to resist, were the very ones seduced by secret practices masked as necessity and devotion. Religious leaders held immense authority during the Spanish flu. Churches were ordered shut, but priests continued private visits, blessing the dying and comforting the fearful. Yet diaries from Florence reveal shocking contradictions. Behind closed convent walls, some priests used their access to women quarantined inside to indulge in lust, cloaked in prayer.
One testimony, hidden for decades, described a priest who told a dying woman that her soul would be saved only through intimate cleansing. Another chronicler accused friars of locking young nuns in isolation under the guise of protecting them from infection, while in truth they demanded nightly visits. This echoed the fall of Tiger Woods. For years he symbolized control, his discipline, his perfection. Yet beneath that mask, dozens of affairs emerged. Similarly, priests were thought untouchable, men of divine restraint. But the Spanish flu unveiled their secret surrender, showing how power and reputation mask the same weakness found in every man. The most disciplined often collapse the hardest. The same church that condemned indulgence became a stage for betrayal, just as Woods's golf courses became the backdrop for his downfall. What makes the scandal devastating is not the act itself, but the hypocrisy, the betrayal of the very vows they preached. Discipline was the lifeblood of military command. Generals preached sacrifice, self-control, and obedience. But the Spanish flu showed how even the iron-hearted yielded to temptation. Records from Vienna describe generals who turned quarantined barracks into playgrounds of excess. Young recruits and nurses became objects of possession, pulled into a web of forced intimacy. In one striking case, General Albrecht von Ahr hosted private dinners in sealed quarters. Reports later uncovered how these meals ended in staged performances of intimacy between officers and women secretly brought in under cover of darkness. Witnesses whispered that orders in the day became indulgences at night. Tiger Woods' life paralleled this hypocrisy. On the course, he embodied control, the ultimate symbol of discipline. Off the course, secret affairs piled up, breaking the image he had built. These generals, too, maintained their uniforms of respect in public while hiding behind closed doors at night. For the soldiers under their command, this was betrayal. They were told to die with dignity, while their leaders broke discipline for pleasure. Like Tiger Woods, these generals showed that reputation and honor are masks. And when the mask falls, it shatters not only personal lives, but the institutions built on their names.
The comparison is chilling. In both eras, power, whether professional status or celebrity, allowed men to indulge in acts they believed hidden. But history always reveals what's beneath. For every medical oath broken in 1918, trust collapsed. Just as wood's swing never looked the same after scandal, medicine itself carried the shadow of betrayal. Masks were everywhere in 1918. Paper, cloth, even lace masks were worn across Europe to slow the flu. But masks became more than protection. They became symbols of disguise. In elite gatherings, couples met under the safety of anonymity. A masked man could whisper forbidden promises to a stranger without revealing his name. Women used masks as shields, entering private halls knowing their identities would remain secret. One scandalous account from Madrid described mask balls where guests were ordered to keep their masks on during intimate encounters. Diaries claimed the mystery only heightened desire. The irony was brutal. Masks intended to save lives became the very tools of indulgence and betrayal. Tiger Woods, too, wore a mask of control, of perfection. His smile, his calm, his brand were masks hiding his private addictions. When they fell, the world gasped not at the affairs themselves, but at how long the mask had fooled them. The Spanish flu's mask balls reflected the same truth. Society is often complicit, pretending not to see until scandal erupts. When masks come off, shame follows. These gatherings remind us that pandemics don't just spread disease, they spread hypocrisy, stripping away the illusion that power and discipline make anyone immune to desire. Priests, generals, doctors, and masked elites each claimed discipline yet surrendered to hidden indulgence. Their scandals echo Tiger Woods' downfall. The tighter the mask, the more shattering its fall. But the next tale takes us deeper, because when betrayal moved from leaders to kings, entire nations trembled under the weight of lust. Lance Armstrong was once hailed as a hero, only to be stripped bare by the scandal of doping, deception, and hidden desires. Just as his victories were built on a foundation of lies, the Spanish flu era hid filthy stories of power and lust behind a veil of sickness. Armstrong's rise to global dominance was fueled by elaborate cheating, his triumphs tainted. During the Spanish flu pandemic, Europe saw similar illusions of purity. Public health officials portrayed the continent as unified in grief and resilience. Yet beneath this mask, secret gatherings of soldiers, widows, and aristocrats created a carnival of lust. Hospitals overflowed with death, but makeshift brothels thrived in abandoned basements. Diaries from Geneva describe doctors' warning of uncontrollable urges spreading faster than the disease. Women who had lost husbands sought comfort in reckless arms. Men infected with the flu still pursued forbidden pleasures, ignoring quarantine. Just as Armstrong convinced the world that his superhuman feats were pure, these lovers masked their shame with illusions of intimacy. In both, the performance was everything. Medals in one case, whispered ecstasy in another. The lie was their power, but also their downfall. The Spanish flu's greatest scandal was not only death, but the desperate hunger to feel alive, no matter how filthy the act. Armstrong's doping was a performance enhancer, allowing him to push human limits. In 1919, performance enhancement took on a grotesque twist. Men and women used alcohol, opiates, and early stimulants not for sport, but to sustain nights of forbidden pleasure while Europe burned with fever. French reports tell of morphine-laced encounters where widows forgot grief in trembling arms. Soldiers returning broken numbed pain with drugs before collapsing into illicit embraces. Influenza spread through these reckless contacts, often traced back to crowded bars where whiskey flowed as easily as disease. The line between survival and self-destruction blurred. Just as Armstrong convinced the world that his superhuman feats were pure, these lovers convinced themselves their bodies could endure both flu and forbidden intimacy. Both were false promises, one exposed by drug tests, the other by rising death tolls. Historians call this the secret carnival, where desperation turned into a grotesque performance. The body was pushed beyond limits, not to win medals, but to defy despair.
Lance Armstrong wore a mask of honor, parading as the clean champion who inspired millions. Behind closed doors, he was stained with lies. The Spanish flu era had its own masks, literally. People wore face coverings in public, but behind those same masks, their desires ran unchecked. In Madrid, masked balls became scandalous hotspots. Eyewitness accounts describe masked men slipping into chambers with grieving women. Behind the guise of public safety, these masks allowed anonymity, feeding secret obsessions. Letters from Paris reveal confessions of priests who succumbed to temptation, preaching purity by day, but chasing lust by night. Shame was the fuel. Everyone knew the mask could hide sin, but only temporarily. Armstrong's mask eventually fell, exposing a legacy of disgrace. The fluid-era mask, too, slipped away, revealing infections, pregnancies, and scandals. Honor was the facade, shame the reality. Both Armstrong and the pandemic lovers believed their masks could shield them. In truth, the mask only delayed judgment, never erased it. Armstrong's empire collapsed when truth pierced the illusion. His titles were stripped, his sponsors fled, and his name became synonymous with betrayal. The Spanish flu's filthy secrets collapsed in similar fashion. The underground networks of lust, fueled by grief and fever, became breeding grounds for scandalous exposure. Reports from London describe entire neighborhoods shamed when flu dens were uncovered, where widows and soldiers exchanged more than affection. Political elites who preached morality were found guilty of the very sins they condemned. Just as Armstrong stood humiliated before the world, generals, priests, and nobles were dragged down by rumors of filthy indulgence. What began as secret escapes ended as public disgrace. Both Armstrong and the flu-era lovers learned the same harsh truth. A false empire built on lies, doping, or lust eventually crumbles. In the silence after collapse, only shame remains. And yet, even in ruin, whispers of their scandals lived on, etched into memory like a curse, reminding us that desperation often breeds the dirtiest of secrets. Armstrong's downfall proved no empire of deceit can stand. In the Spanish flu years, pleasure and plague collided in filthy ways history tried to erase. But the next scandal cuts even deeper, when masks of virtue fell in courts of power, and one affair brought a president to his knees. Paris Hilton's leaked tape turned shame into spectacle, transforming scandal into stardom. During the Spanish flu pandemic, Europe too discovered that exposure could destroy reputations or, perversely, create them. Behind quarantine walls, private acts became public rumors, spreading as quickly as the disease, leaving some disgraced and others strangely empowered. Paris Hilton never planned to become infamous through exposure, yet her scandal reshaped celebrity culture. In 1919, privacy also collapsed in strange, filthy ways. Boarding houses across Paris and Vienna became hubs where whispers traveled faster than the virus. What began behind closed doors often slipped into public knowledge. Nurses wrote in diaries of young men and women seen together, their sickness forgotten, in embraces too bold. Funeral parlors reported the shocking behavior of mourners, with widows taking lovers openly near coffins. Just as Hilton's private tape became public entertainment, these moments blurred the line between intimacy and performance. Rumors thrived because gossip gave people power. Those who indulged did so with the thrill of secrecy, but the inevitability of exposure hung over them. In every city, the flu took lives, while scandal gave stories. Some individuals emerged shamed, their reputations shattered. Others, perversely, were celebrated for their boldness. Symbols of a society refusing to die quietly. The Spanish flu, like Paris Hilton's scandal, showed that in the darkest times people watched, whispered,
and remembered.
Paris Hilton's scandal was not just shame, it became profitable, birthing a billion-dollar fame empire. In 1918, scandal too had a market. Black markets across Madrid and Berlin sold photographs, sketches, and even forged letters depicting illicit liaisons between nurses, soldiers, and aristocrats. These images, crude yet provocative, became collectibles. Diaries reference morbid cravings to witness that which was forbidden. Even in sickness, people wanted spectacle. Just as Hilton's tape was consumed by millions, the flu-era scandal market thrived on desperation. Families of the dying sometimes exploited grief, selling stories of lovers' affairs for coin. Prostitutes infected with influenza became fetishized, with men believing intimacy with the sick brought otherworldly ecstasy. The economics of lust mixed with death, making shame a currency. Like Hilton's scandal feeding the tabloid machine, flu-era secrets fed profiteers who understood that even in mourning, people craved drama. What was private became public property, traded in whispers, printed in underground presses, and remembered in diaries. The flu killed millions, but the scandal sold millions of words. The market of shame turned into its own pandemic. Paris Hilton's scandal reshaped ideas of femininity. Was she a victim or architect of her fame? In the Spanish flu years, women too became central symbols of exposure. Letters from Rome detail nurses accused of improper relations while treating patients. In truth, these women were often scapegoats, their reputations weaponized by rumor. Aristocratic widows became targets of slander, accused of entertaining officers while the city buried its dead. Some women embraced scandal, deliberately breaking norms. A Spanish countess reportedly hosted masked dinners where intimacy was staged as performance. Just as Hilton's image was replayed endlessly, these women's reputations were endlessly dissected. Male behavior, though equally filthy, was often excused. Female desire was magnified as scandal. Gossip weaponized gender, turning women into both spectacle and lesson. Priests warned from pulpits about fallen daughters of plague, while common folk whispered eagerly about noble women's affairs. Hilton's scandal revealed society's obsession with shaming women while secretly consuming their exposure. The flu era was no different. Women became both victims and stars of Europe's underground theater of lust. In both ages, society consumed female scandals like oxygen. Hilton emerged from her scandal not broken, but immortalized, remembered more for exposure than for silence. In Europe's Spanish flu, some scandalized figures achieved the same strange legacy. A French poetess, accused of seducing influenza patients, was expelled from salons but celebrated in underground circles. A Viennese dancer, rumored to perform private shows for quarantined officers, became a legend of resistance, her name whispered long after her death. Scandal, instead of erasing them, etched their stories into cultural memory. Just as Hilton turned humiliation into a springboard, flu-era figures turned whispers into permanence. The disease passed, but their names remained inked in diaries, literature, and folklore. They showed that even when the world was suffocating under masks and mourning, scandal provided something unforgettable: human defiance through desire. Hilton proved modern fame could be built on infamy. The flu era proved history, too, could immortalize those who dared to be filthy in the face of death. In both cases, shame was only temporary. Immortality was the true prize, bought with exposure.
Britney Spears fought years under a conservatorship that silenced her voice and dictated her choices. During the Spanish flu pandemic, countless individuals too found themselves trapped in cages of control, bodies confined, desires policed, voices dismissed. Like Britney, many struggled to break free from invisible chains wrapped tighter by power. Britney Spears' battle was not against illness, but against control, where her personal autonomy was stripped away. In 1918 to 1919 Europe, quarantine rules similarly imprisoned people. Entire neighborhoods in Madrid and Milan were sealed by authorities, families locked inside homes with no say in their own lives. Reports from Spanish municipal archives reveal individuals writing desperate letters. "We are healthy, yet condemned to walls." Quarantine became a conservatorship of entire cities. Women, especially, were policed more strictly. Diaries from London reference neighbors gossiping about widows sneaking men past inspectors. Much like Brittany under constant media surveillance, flu victims lived under watchful eyes. Even their most private acts became the subject of rumors enforced by both the state and society. Freedom of movement, love, and even choice of burial were controlled. The Spanish flu exposed how institutions used a crisis to control lives, echoing Brittany's entrapment decades later. Both revealed the same chilling truth: control, once taken, is rarely surrendered willingly. People longed for freedom not just from death, but from the invisible guardians of power who claimed to know better. Britney Spears' conservatorship controlled not only her money, but also her relationships. Partners had to be approved, even intimate decisions scrutinized. During the Spanish flu, lockdown turned intimacy into a forbidden act. In Paris, young couples were separated by guards patrolling streets. Those who resisted were fined or shamed in public. Yet, forbidden love always found a way. Reports from Berlin describe lovers signaling through windows, sneaking into cellars, or bribing guards for secret meetings. These moments of rebellion resembled Britney's whispered resistance when she pleaded in court for her autonomy. The desire to connect, even in times of restriction, became both dangerous and scandalous. Churches condemned these reckless lovers, equating their acts to spreading death. Yet, letters reveal that some considered it an act of freedom. "If I must die of flu, let it be in his arms." Britney's conservatorship showed the cruelty of power that polices love. The Spanish flu showed the same cruelty on a societal scale. Human desire was treated as reckless, when in truth, it was survival. Proof that people still wanted to live, feel, and choose, even in cages. The #Free Britney movement exposed how public spectacle fed on private suffering. Crowds outside courtrooms cheered, judged, and watched as her autonomy was debated. The Spanish flu, too, turned control into a spectacle. Newspapers across Europe reported not only on death tolls, but on immoral behaviors of those in quarantine. In Milan, headlines shamed a woman for hosting men while her children coughed. In London, authorities published names of those caught breaking lockdown rules, turning them into public examples. The spectacle was moral as much as medical. Just as Britney's life became fodder for tabloids, flu victims' reputations were shredded to feed public appetite for scandal. People enjoyed consuming stories of those punished, as if watching others suffer confirmed their own righteousness. Spanish records reveal cases where individuals were paraded through town for defying restrictions, mocked like performers in a cruel show. Britney's pain was monetized by tabloids. Flu victims' shame was weaponized by authorities. Both eras show society's addiction to turning control into entertainment. The true sickness was not only the virus or the conservatorship, but the public's eager gaze. Britney Spears eventually broke free after global voices demanded her release. But her scars remain, a reminder of how power steals years. In Europe, some too broke chains of control during the flu. In Vienna, citizens rioted against quarantine rules, storming municipal buildings and demanding freedom. In Madrid, doctors themselves began secretly ignoring rules, allowing patients to reunite with lovers. Diaries tell of soldiers deserting hospitals to spend final nights with their partners, choosing desire over regulation. These acts mirrored Britney's court declaration, "I just want my life back." Defiance came at a price. Some were imprisoned, others exiled, reputations destroyed. But like Britney, they proved that control could not last forever. History remembers those who resisted as symbols of human resilience. In the face of illness or legal cages, the instinct to reclaim freedom of body and soul is unstoppable.
Britney's liberation echoed the whispers of those long ago who refused to die quietly in cages of control. Both stories remind us freedom may be delayed, but it cannot be erased.